I thought I was walking into a quiet family home. Instead, I walked into the exact moment my life split in two. My parents were still alive when I found them, but whoever did this had already planned the next move. 7 days later, I learned the truth was not just evil, it was personal, and the man who held me while I cried had already decided I would be the one blamed for everything. My name is Nora Harris. I am 34 years old, and I calculate worst-case scenarios for a living. As a senior risk analyst at North Pass Risk Group, my entire career is built on predicting disasters before they strike. I evaluate variables. I look at data points. I assess human behavior and financial instability to protect corporate assets. I am paid to see the catastrophe coming from a mile away. Yet standing in the middle of my own life, I saw absolutely nothing. It was a Monday afternoon when I finally made the drive out to the St. Louis suburbs. The Sunday night call had been missed. Mom and Dad always called at exactly 7 o'clock on Sunday evening. It was a ritual, an unbreakable routine. When my phone stayed silent the night before, I told myself they were just busy. Maybe they went to bed early. Maybe they went out to dinner and forgot to charge their phones. I rationalized it the way people do when they want to avoid the creeping edge of anxiety. But by Monday afternoon, the silence had morphed into a heavy physical weight in my chest. The drive took exactly 45 minutes. 45 minutes of quiet guilt eating away at my conscience. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my car and thought about all the family dinners I had postponed over the last 6 months. I had been too busy with work, too caught up in the corporate ladder, too invested in building my supposedly perfect life with my husband Grant. I told myself this impromptu visit would make up for my absence. It would be a belated but warm surprise. I pictured the scene in my head. I would walk through the front door, apologize for being distant, and sit at their marble kitchen island. Mom would pour dark roast coffee. Dad would ask about my stock portfolio. It was a comforting lie I spun to keep my foot steady on the gas pedal. I pulled onto their familiar street. The neighborhood was quiet. It was the epitome of suburban perfection with manicured lawns and silent sidewalks. But the moment I pulled up to the curb of my childhood home, the risk analyst inside me woke up. The baseline was completely off. The front porch light was glaring brightly in the middle of the sunny afternoon. The garage door was cracked open just a few inches, resting unevenly on the concrete. Dad never left it like that. He was a man of meticulous security. And then I saw his car. His pristine silver sedan was parked at a strange crooked angle on the driveway. The front tire was crushing the edge of the flower bed. It looked like someone had slammed the brakes and rushed inside in an absolute panic. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. I killed the engine. I stepped out of my car. The wind rustled the ancient oak trees in the front yard, but that was the only sound. The silence was absolute. I walked up the driveway. My heels clicked too loudly against the pavement. I unlocked the front door with my spare key. I pushed the heavy oak door open. I stepped into the foyer. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. Nothing. The silence inside the house was thick and unnatural. There was no hum from the television in the living room where Mom usually watched her afternoon cooking shows. There was no crackle of sports radio from Dad's study down the hall. The house felt vacant. It felt dead. I took a step forward onto the hardwood floor, then another. A scent hit me. It was not the usual comforting smell of vanilla candles or fresh laundry that always lingered in my mother's home. It was sharp. It was earthy. A strange, bitter herbal tea smell hung heavily in the stagnant air. It was foreign and acrid. It clawed at the back of my throat and made my eyes water. I walked past the kitchen. I headed toward the glass sunroom at the back of the house. The bright afternoon light was pouring through the massive windows, and then I saw them. My breath left my lungs in a single violent rush. The world tilted violently on its axis. They were on the floor. They were lying right next to the small wrought iron breakfast table. Unconscious, utterly still. 2 matching ceramic teacups sat on the table above them. Both cups were half finished with dark liquid staining the porcelain rims. A thick manila folder lay spilled open on the floor tiles beside Dad's outstretched arm. White papers were scattered everywhere like fallen snow. No, no, no. The words ripped from my throat in a primal scream. I did not run. I threw myself across the room. I dropped to my knees so hard the impact bruised my bone against the tile. I grabbed Mom first. Her skin was terribly cold. Her face was ashen and slack. "Mom, wake up. Please wake up." I shook her shoulder. Her head rolled back lifelessly against my arm. I scrambled over to Dad. My hands shook so violently I could barely find his wrist to check for a pulse. I pressed my trembling fingers against his cold skin. A pulse. It was there, faint, fluttering erratically like a dying bird trapped in a cage. I plunged my hand into my coat pocket and pulled out my cell phone. My fingers slipped on the glass screen. I almost dropped it. I dialed 911. The operator answered immediately. I could not form a complete, coherent sentence. I gasped for air. I choked on my own rising panic. "Ambulance. Please. My parents. They are not waking up. Please. Hurry." I spat out the street address. I dropped the phone onto the floor. I just knelt there beside them, breathing in that bitter herbal stench, waiting for the sirens to pierce the suburban quiet. Time collapsed into a blurry nightmare. Suddenly the house was full of paramedics in dark uniforms. Shouting voices echoed off the high ceilings. Heavy boots stomped across the hardwood. Stretchers rolled loudly through the hallway. I stood in the corner of the sunroom, frozen in place. I watched strangers cut away Dad's shirt to attach defibrillator pads to his chest. They loaded my parents into the back of two separate waiting ambulances. A paramedic with kind eyes told me I could ride in the back of the first one with Mom. I climbed up into the cramped space. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing us inside. The siren wailed instantly. The blinding red lights flashed rhythmically against the metal walls of the ambulance. I looked down at my lap. My hands were covered in sweat and still shaking uncontrollably. Then I noticed it, clenched tightly in my right fist. I must have grabbed it from the floor when I first fell to my knees in the sunroom. It was a crumpled piece of heavy stock paper. It was part of the spilled folder from the floor. My eyes struggled to focus on the black ink printed across the page. I read the words, "Parcel Review," typed boldly at the top margin. The paper was torn, wrinkled by my desperate grip. I stared at those two words, "Parcel Review." It made absolutely no sense. My parents were retired. They had no business parcels to review. I shoved the crumpled paper deep into my coat pocket. My brain simply could not process the information. Not while the heart monitor attached to my mother beeped in a frantic, terrifying rhythm. The ambulance skidded to a sudden halt at the emergency entrance of the hospital. The doors flew open from the outside. Chaos erupted all over again. Nurses and trauma doctors swarmed the stretcher the moment the wheels hit the pavement. They yelled complex medical jargon over each other, blood pressures plunging, heart rates dropping dangerously low. They pushed the stretcher aggressively through the heavy double doors of the emergency room. I tried to follow them. I needed to stay with her. But a triage nurse placed a firm, commanding hand on my chest and stopped me in my tracks. She told me I had to wait in the family waiting area. The double doors swung shut in my face, locking me out. I was completely alone. The waiting room smelled of industrial bleach and stale vending machine coffee. I sank slowly into a hard plastic chair. The adrenaline was finally beginning to drain from my veins. And in its place, the panic was morphing into something else. Something much colder. Something infinitely darker. My mind began to race backward. I replayed the tape of the last hour. The image of Dad's car parked haphazardly on the lawn, the glaring porch light burning in the daylight, the cracked garage door, the bizarre, bitter smell of the tea, the scattered legal papers on the sunroom floor. The cryptic document in my pocket, "I am a professional risk analyst. I spend my life looking at anomalies to find the hidden truth." And every single anomaly in that house pointed directly to one terrifying, impossible conclusion. This was not a stroke. This was not a tragic biological accident. They did not just collapse. Somebody was inside that house. Somebody sat at that table with them. Somebody brought that tea. Somebody did this to them. And as I sat in that freezing waiting room, terrified that my parents were taking their final breaths, I had a sickening gut feeling that the nightmare had not just ended. It was only just beginning. The fluorescent lights above hummed a low, relentless tune that drilled directly into my skull. 2 hours had passed since the doors swung shut. A man in deep blue scrubs finally walked through them. His badge read, Dr. Aris. His face held the heavy, neutral expression of someone who delivered bad news for a living. I stood up so fast the plastic chair scraped violently against the linoleum floor. He did not offer false hope. He pulled me into a quiet alcove away from the vending machines and the crying families. He told me they had stabilized the vitals, but the blood panels revealed a terrifying narrative. This was not a dual stroke. It was not severe food poisoning from a bad batch of fish at the local market. My parents had massive quantities of a heavy pharmaceutical sedative mixed with a highly concentrated digitalis derivative racing through their veins. Heart medication. They were never prescribed paired with tranquilizers strong enough to drop a grown horse. Someone had chemically engineered their collapse. The word intentional hung in the sterilized air between us. The hospital had already triggered mandatory protocols. Uniformed officers arrived 20 minutes later. They were not treating my childhood home as a medical rescue scene anymore. It was now an active crime scene. A tall patrolman informed me that the initial sweep of the property showed zero signs of forced entry. The windows were locked from the inside. The back patio doors were secured. The safe in the master bedroom was untouched. Mom's jewelry box sat perfectly arranged on her dresser. Dad's vintage watch collection remained entirely intact. There was no burglary, no desperate addict kicking down the door for quick cash. I shook my head vigorously when the officer suggested a random home invasion gone wrong. I told him my parents were fiercely private people. They lived in a tight, insulated bubble. They did not host lavish neighborhood parties. They did not open the door for solicitors. They had a digital security system they armed religiously every single night. The theory of a random, violent drifter made absolutely no logical sense. They would never unlock their front door for a stranger, let alone sit down and share a pot of tea with one. Then the sliding glass doors of the emergency room parted, and Grant walked in. My husband moved through the chaotic triage area with an unsettling grace. His navy wool coat was perfectly pressed. His hair was impeccably styled. He did not look like a man whose in-laws were currently hooked up to life support machines. He looked like a corporate executive stepping into a board meeting he had already won. He spotted me and crossed the room in swift, measured strides. He wrapped his arms around my shaking shoulders and pulled me against his chest. He smelled of expensive cedar cologne and cold autumn air. I buried my face in his lapel, wanting to feel anchored, but his heartbeat against my cheek felt completely steady, too steady. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. His voice was smooth and perfectly modulated. He told me I needed to breathe. He kissed my forehead and immediately stated he would take over all the administrative burdens. He told me he would contact the insurance companies, handle the hospital administrators, and manage any legal hurdles that might arise from their sudden incapacitation. He said the word legal with such fluid ease it momentarily short-circuited my brain. My parents were fighting for their lives down the hall, and my husband was already volunteering to manage their paperwork. Before I could question his strange pivot, a woman interrupted us. She wore a tailored gray pantsuit and a badge clipped to her leather belt. Detective Lena Voss introduced herself with a firm handshake and eyes that analyzed every single micro-expression on my face. She did not offer empty sympathies. She dealt in hard facts. She pulled a small notepad from her pocket. She wanted to know about access. She asked me to list every single person who possessed a spare key to the house. She asked who understood my parents' daily rhythms. Who knew they sat in the sunroom at exactly 3 o'clock every afternoon? Who knew they preferred herbal tea over coffee late in the day? She wanted names of housekeepers, landscapers, estranged relatives, and financial advisors. Every question was a sharp little needle probing for a weak spot in my family structure. Grant answered for me when my voice faltered. He sounded incredibly helpful, offering the name of the lawn care service and the old accountant. I watched his profile as he spoke. He was so poised, so remarkably in control. The detective stepped away to take a phone call, leaving us alone by the coffee kiosk. Grant told me he was going to step outside to make a few urgent calls to his office. He squeezed my hand and walked away. I sank back down onto the uncomfortable waiting room bench. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I needed a distraction from the crushing weight of the hospital walls. I opened my call log to stare at the missed call from Sunday night. A small red notification bubble hovered over my voicemail icon. My thumb hovered over the screen. I tapped it. The automated voice announced a message received at 7:45 on Sunday evening. The audio began to play. It was my mother, but her voice was completely unrecognizable. It was a hushed, frantic whisper, the sound of a woman terrified of being overheard. Her breath hitched directly into the microphone. "Nora, if Grant sends any papers, do not sign them." A sharp click followed, then dead air. The hospital noise faded into a hollow ringing in my ears. The air in my lungs turned to solid ice. A violent shiver ripped down my spine. I hit replay. I pressed the phone so hard against my ear the plastic dug into my skin. I listened to the sheer panic vibrating in my mother's throat. I listened to the warning. I listened to the name of my husband. My mind fractured into 1,000 jagged pieces. The man who just held me. The man who just offered to handle all the legal paperwork. The man whose heartbeat was perfectly calm while my world burned down. I scrambled to mute the phone. I shoved it deep into the bottom of my leather handbag. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely work the zipper. I could not show this to the police. Not yet. Giving that audio file to Detective Voss would be the point of no return. It would detonate my entire reality. I was a risk analyst. I needed absolute proof before I destroyed my marriage. I needed to understand the scope of the threat before I exposed my throat to the predator. I lacked the courage to accept what that 15-second audio clip truly meant. Detective Voss walked back over to my bench. She put her notepad away. She looked down at me with a gaze that felt entirely too perceptive. She tilted her head slightly. She told me the crime scene technicians had finished their initial sweep of the exterior doors. She confirmed there were absolutely no scratch marks on the deadbolts, no shattered glass, no forced entry of any kind. She leaned in slightly. Her voice was low and devoid of any comforting warmth. She said the person who poisoned my parents did not need to break down a door. The perpetrator did not need to sneak through a window. She looked right through my fragile defenses and delivered the final crushing blow. She told me the person who did this was invited inside. The heavy swinging doors of the intensive care unit waiting area pushed open. The quiet, sterile atmosphere shattered instantly. My Aunt Denise Harper entered the room like a localized hurricane. She was my mother's younger sister, but they shared absolutely no resemblance in temperament or grace. Denise threw her arms around my neck and began to sob loudly. Her cries echoed off the linoleum floors, drawing stares from the nurses at the station. She wailed about the sheer tragedy of it all and how she could not believe her beloved older sister was fighting for her life. I stood rigidly in her embrace. I felt nothing but exhaustion. The dramatic performance did not last long. The tears vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Denise pulled back and wiped her perfectly dry cheeks with a silk handkerchief. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. She did not ask about blood pressure or oxygen levels. She did not ask what the doctors were doing to save them. She asked about the paperwork. She wanted to know who held the medical proxy. She asked if I knew where the master copy of the living trust was currently kept. She mentioned that things could get extremely complicated and incredibly expensive if the estate was left in legal limbo for months. My parents had barely been breathing on their own for 3 hours, and my aunt was already circling the perimeter of their wealth like a vulture catching the scent of decay. Her invasive questions unlocked a memory I had buried under the heavy stress of my corporate job. Over the last 2 months, my parents had mentioned a sudden influx of strange phone calls. My grandfather had left them a massive tract of land down by the river. It was a sprawling collection of rusted industrial storage units and cracked concrete lots. For almost 40 years, it was a forgotten depreciating asset that barely generated enough rent to cover its own property taxes. But recently, something had shifted dramatically in the local real estate market. Developers had started circling the area. My father had mentioned receiving aggressive purchase offers completely out of the blue. Before I could fully process my aunt's true intentions, the doors opened again. My cousin Owen Pike walked in. This was a massive anomaly. Owen actively avoided family gatherings at all costs. He was Denise's only son and a notorious financial liability. He was always chasing the next sure thing. He had a crippling addiction to offshore sports betting that had bankrupted him twice before his 30th birthday. He was constantly sweating. He smelled like stale tobacco and cheap mints. He paced the waiting room with a frantic, jittery energy that made my skin crawl. He did not ask how my parents were doing. He just kept rubbing his temples and asking how long the doctors thought they would be unconscious. His desperation was palpable. He looked exactly like a man running out of time. I sat back on the hard plastic bench and observed my own blood relatives. A dark pattern was beginning to form in my mind. 10 days ago, my father had abruptly fired his longtime accountant. Renee Cole had managed our family finances since I was in elementary school. When I asked my mother about the sudden termination during our weekly phone call, she absolutely refused to elaborate on the details. Her voice had been uncharacteristically cold and guarded. She simply told me that there are some people in this world who can no longer be trusted. I had blindly assumed it was a minor disagreement over tax filings. Now, looking at my greedy aunt and my frantic cousin, that firing felt like a massive red flag I had completely ignored. Grant seamlessly integrated himself into the chaotic family dynamic. He stepped right in between Denise and me, playing the role of the devoted, capable husband to absolute perfection. He put a reassuring hand on Owen's shaking shoulder. He looked Denise squarely in the eyes and promised her that she did not need to worry about any administrative burdens. He calmly announced that he was taking full control of the situation. He volunteered to speak directly with the hospital billing department. He offered to contact the insurance providers first thing in the morning. And most chillingly, he told Denise he would personally reach out to the family lawyers to ensure the estate remained completely secure while my parents recovered. Every single word out of his mouth sounded incredibly supportive. To the rest of the room, he was a saint, a pillar of strength. But the secret voicemail from my mother was screaming in the back of my mind. I watched my husband volunteer to take control of my family's legal affairs, and I felt a wave of pure nausea wash over me. I nodded silently and let him play his part. I needed him to think I was too broken and too grief-stricken to notice the trap he was carefully setting. Grant excused himself to go get coffee for the room. The moment he stepped into the hallway, Denise and Owen gravitated toward the far corner of the waiting area. They thought I was too paralyzed by grief to pay attention to them. They were entirely wrong. As a risk analyst, I am trained to listen to the background noise. I angled my body away from them and focused entirely on their hushed, hurried conversation. Owen sounded furious. He muttered something about the timeline being completely ruined. Denise hushed him aggressively. Then she said something that made my blood run entirely cold. She complained that my father was too stubborn for his own good. She whispered that if he had just accepted the massive buyout offer 4 weeks ago, none of this would be happening. 4 weeks ago, a massive buyout offer. My father had rejected a deal. A deal big enough to make my debt-ridden cousin panic and my greedy aunt lose her composure. The sound of heavy footsteps pulled me away from the eavesdropping. Detective Lena Voss had returned to the waiting area. She bypassed my aunt and cousin and walked straight over to me. Her expression was completely unreadable. She asked if we could step into the private consultation room down the hall. I followed her into the small, windowless room. She closed the heavy wooden door behind us, blocking out the noise of my family. She leaned against the table and folded her arms. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She asked me a direct question. She wanted to know if anyone in my family had recently engaged in a bitter dispute with my parents over money. She asked if there was any friction regarding inheritance property sales or business decisions. An hour ago, I would have vehemently defended my family. I would have told the detective that we were normal. I would have said that nobody in my bloodline was capable of attempted murder. But standing in that quiet room, the pieces of the puzzle slammed violently together. I thought about the old Riverside warehouse property suddenly becoming a gold mine. I thought about the desperate gambling debts hanging over Owen's head. I thought about Denise asking about the living trust before shedding a single real tear. I thought about the sudden firing of a trusted family accountant 10 days prior. And above all else, I thought about my husband eagerly stepping up to take control of the legal paperwork while my mother's warning echoed in my brain. I looked at the detective. I did not want to speak the words into existence. Admitting it out loud made it real. But the predatory looks in the eyes of my aunt and cousin made the question impossible to brush off. My parents were not just victims of a random poisoning. They had been intentionally eliminated from the board. They were standing in the way of a massive payday. I realized with absolute terrifying clarity that my mother and father had been pushed directly into the center of a silent, ruthless war for power and wealth. And the people waging that war were sitting right outside in the waiting room, drinking bad coffee and pretending to mourn. The intensive care unit was a landscape of digital monitors and plastic tubes. I sat in a rigid chair beside my mother for 18 straight hours before a change finally happened. It was a Tuesday morning. The steady rhythmic hiss of the ventilator shifted. Her eyelids fluttered. They were bruised and translucent like old parchment. I leaned forward instantly. I grabbed her frail hand. Her fingers felt like ice. A nurse stepped into the room, holding a clear plastic pitcher filled with crushed ice and water. She poured a small cup and brought the plastic straw toward my mother's dry, cracked lips. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. My mother's eyes snapped wide open. Pure, raw panic flooded her pale face. She thrashed her head violently against the thin hospital pillow. She pushed her weak hands blindly into the air, batting the water cup away. The water spilled across the sterile blanket. She was hyperventilating. She stared at the pitcher as if it contained pure battery acid. The terror in her eyes was not the confusion of a heavily medicated patient. It was the sharp, visceral trauma of someone who knew exactly how she ended up in this bed. The nurse quickly backed away, murmuring apologies. I leaned down until my ear was inches from her mouth. Her breathing was ragged. She gripped my wrist with a sudden, desperate strength that bruised my skin. Her voice was barely a rasping breath. "Do not let him take the green folder. That tea." She did not say anything else. The monitor alarms flared as her heart rate spiked. The exhaustion pulled her violently back into the dark. Her grip on my wrist went completely slack. I stood frozen by the bed. The green folder. That tea. The words anchored themselves deep in my chest. They were not random fragments of a drug-induced dream. They were a direct warning. Across the glass partition in the adjacent room, my father was fighting his own battle against the sedatives. I walked over and stood at the foot of his bed. He was not entirely conscious, but his jaw was working frantically. He was caught in a feverish loop. His head rolled from side to side. He kept muttering a single phrase over and over again. "Parcel map, parcel map." I moved closer. I touched his shoulder, trying to soothe the agitation. Then his voice dropped an octave. It became devastatingly clear. He spoke 4 words to the empty ceiling. Grant already knows it. The air rushed completely out of my lungs. I stumbled backward and hit the edge of the vital signs monitor. Grant, my husband. My father had just named the man who slept next to me every single night. I felt a hand land heavily on my shoulder. I spun around. Grant was standing right behind me. He was holding 2 paper cups of expensive coffee. His face was a mask of flawless concern. He asked me what was wrong. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I stared at his perfectly styled hair and his tailored suit. I forced my voice to stay level. I told him what my father just muttered. I watched his eyes for any micro-expression of guilt. Grant let out a long, exhausted sigh. He set the coffee cups down on a medical tray. He reached out and stroked my arms with slow, deliberate motions. He spoke in a voice dripping with condescending warmth. He told me I was torturing myself. He explained that my parents had massive amounts of toxic tranquilizers in their bloodstream. He said they were hallucinating. He firmly advised me not to manufacture a conspiracy out of meaningless narcotic babble. He pulled me into his chest and told me to go home and get some sleep. He insisted I needed to pack a bag with fresh clothes and proper toiletries while he stayed to monitor the doctors. I agreed. Not because I believed a single word he said. I agreed because I needed to get out of that room before I screamed. Driving back to my childhood home felt like navigating a ghost town. The police had removed the yellow crime scene tape from the front door after finishing their preliminary sweep. I used my key and stepped into the suffocating silence. The bitter herbal smell was completely gone. Now the house just smelled empty. I walked past the kitchen and went straight into my father's home office. He was a man who categorized everything. His mahogany desk was always pristine. His filing cabinets were arranged alphabetically and by fiscal year. I approached the tall metal cabinet in the corner. It looked completely normal at first glance, but I am trained to look for deviations in the baseline. The second drawer from the top was protruding by a fraction of an inch. It had not been pushed shut until the latch clicked. I pulled the drawer open. The hanging manila files were perfectly aligned. But in the center of the financial section there was a glaring physical void, a gap exactly the width of a thick file. The surrounding folders were slightly bowed, leaning into the empty space, a space where a green folder should have been. Someone had searched this room. It was not a chaotic smash and grab. It was a surgical extraction by someone who knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly where my father kept it. I left the study and walked into the kitchen to grab a trash bag for my clothes. I opened the stainless steel step can under the sink. On top of the discarded coffee grounds and paper towels sat a crushed cardboard box. The glossy foil packaging caught the overhead light. It was an imported artisanal chamomile blend. My parents drank generic black tea purchased in bulk from the local grocery store. They never bought expensive herbal blends. I pulled the crushed box out of the trash. The packaging boasted organic calming properties. It was the perfect vehicle to mask the bitter taste of crushed sedatives. Something else was stuck to the side of the tea box, a piece of torn paper. I carefully peeled it off and laid it flat on the granite counter. It was the bottom half of a courier shipping receipt. The top was ripped away, but the destination address was perfectly clear. It was addressed to the county clerk's land registry division. The sender was a corporate law firm located downtown. I looked at the printed timestamp. The package had been prepared and staged for pickup exactly 48 hours before my parents were found unconscious on the sunroom floor. The legal machinery was already moving before the tea was ever poured. The trap had been set days in advance. My cell phone vibrated violently against the granite countertop. The sudden noise made me flinch. The screen displayed Detective Lena Voss. I answered immediately. Her voice was entirely devoid of pleasantries. She did not ask how I was holding up. She told me to listen carefully. Less than 3 hours ago, right as the sun was coming up, someone walked into a prominent bank branch downtown. They approached the teller window and presented a freshly notarized legal document. It was a temporary power of attorney. They used that document to attempt a massive wire transfer from my parents' primary checking and investment accounts. The bank manager flagged the transaction because of the sheer volume of the requested funds and put a freeze on the accounts. I gripped the edge of the counter. The granite was freezing cold against my palms. I asked her who tried to take the money. Detective Voss paused. The silence on the line felt heavier than gravity. She told me the person who presented the temporary power of attorney claimed they were acting on my behalf. They possessed a document bearing my exact digital signature. They claimed I was too emotionally compromised by the tragedy to handle the family finances. The walls of the kitchen seemed to close in around me. The pieces of the nightmare finally locked together in a perfect, terrifying grid. The missing green folder, the artisanal tea, the prepared courier envelope, the warning from my mother. The person who did this did not just want to eliminate my parents. They wanted to steal their legacy. And the man who comforted me in the hospital hallway, the man who promised to handle all the legal burdens, was currently using my grief as a weapon to take everything. I hung up the phone. I stood completely alone in the house where I grew up. I was no longer just a grieving daughter. I was the perfect scapegoat. I had been framed, and the countdown to my absolute ruin had already begun. I did not go back to the hospital immediately. I sat alone at the kitchen island of my childhood home and opened my laptop. The crushing wave of grief had finally receded, leaving behind a cold, hardened surface. I am a senior risk analyst. My entire career is dedicated to finding the hidden liabilities that other people gloss over. I look past the smiling faces in boardrooms and dig directly into the raw data. I track anomalies. I find the structural weaknesses before the collapse happens. Waiting for the local police to piece together a financial puzzle would take weeks. They look for motives after the blood is spilled. I find the blueprint of the trap itself. I pushed my personal devastation aside and went to work. I started with the name my father had muttered from his hospital bed and the hushed fragments of conversation I had overheard from my Aunt Denise. I logged into the state corporate registry database and ran a comprehensive query on the Riverside warehouse property. I pulled the public tax records and cross-referenced them with recent property inquiries. A distinct pattern emerged almost immediately. There had been a sudden barrage of aggressively low purchase offers submitted over the last 90 days. Every single one of those offers originated from a newly formed entity named Crescent Harbor Holdings. I dug deeper into the corporate shell. I pulled the articles of incorporation for Crescent Harbor Holdings. The company had been registered less than 6 months ago. The listed address was not a downtown high-rise. It was a suite number in a rundown strip mall on the edge of the county line. I ran the address through a commercial real estate directory and found that the suite was currently listed as a vacant lease space. It was a phantom office, a ghost entity designed to hide the real buyers. But shell companies always leave a paper trail if you know where to look. I checked the name of the registered agent who had signed the initial limited liability paperwork. The signature belonged to a junior partner at a prominent corporate law firm located in the financial district. My fingers stopped moving across the keyboard. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt freezing cold. It was the exact same law firm where my husband Grant had spent 2 years working as an external consultant on a massive corporate merger. The invisible thread connecting my husband to the people trying to buy my family land was no longer a theory. It was a documented fact. I needed to know exactly what my father knew before he was silenced. I opened his email provider and stared at the login screen. I guessed his password on the third attempt using my mother's maiden name and the year they bought this house. I bypassed his inbox and clicked directly into his drafted messages folder. Sitting at the top of the list was an unsent email addressed to the senior partners at that exact same law firm. It was dated exactly 14 days ago. The text of the email was a formal and incredibly sharp rejection of their final buyout offer, but it was the attached files that made my heart hammer against my ribs. My father had uploaded a series of confidential municipal zoning blueprints. He had used a digital marker to highlight a massive proposed federal logistics route designed to bypass the heavily congested interstate highway system. The new infrastructure project would require a monumental expansion of the local riverport, and my grandfather's forgotten warehouse property sat squarely in the absolute center of the expansion zone. If the federal project broke ground, that useless strip of dirt and rusted metal would become the most valuable piece of commercial real estate in the entire county. The buyers were not offering a few $100,000 out of the goodness of their hearts. The projection models on my father's spreadsheet indicated a future payout in the tens of millions. The motive was clear. The money was astronomical, but I still needed to find the physical bridge. How did the poison actually enter my parents' house? I thought about the crushed artisanal chamomile box I had found in the garbage. My parents never bought high-end luxury tea. I left my house and walked next door to the Gables. They were a retired couple who had installed a sophisticated high-definition doorbell camera last spring. I put on my best distressed daughter face and told Mr. Gable there had been a rash of stolen mail in the neighborhood. I asked if I could quickly review his cloud storage to see if anyone had approached my parents' porch. He handed me his tablet without hesitation. I scrubbed backward through the video feeds, matching the dates and timestamps to my own corporate travel schedule. It took me 40 minutes of scrolling before I found the anomaly. On a Tuesday afternoon while I was boarding a flight to Chicago, a familiar silver sedan pulled into my parents' driveway. Renee Cole stepped out of the driver's seat. She was the longtime accountant my father had abruptly fired just 10 days ago. I watched her walk up the paved path, carrying a large woven gift basket. Tucked prominently inside the clear cellophane wrapping was the distinct glossy foil box of artisanal chamomile tea. I fast-forwarded the footage. She visited the house again on a Thursday afternoon while I was stuck in a marathon board meeting in Dallas. 2 visits, 2 deliveries. Perfectly timed for the exact days I was out of the state and unavailable to drop by for a surprise visit. I handed the tablet back to my neighbor and thanked him. I walked back to my parents' house and locked the heavy oak door behind me. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed the one person I hoped was still outside the blast radius. Miles Wexler was our old family lawyer. He was a quiet, meticulous man who had drafted my parents' original estate documents over 2 decades ago. He answered on the second ring. He sounded incredibly exhausted. I did not give him time to offer his condolences about the hospital. I bypassed the pleasantries completely and asked him what my father had spoken to him about during their last conversation. Miles hesitated for a long, heavy moment. I could hear him shifting papers on his desk. He finally let out a long, defeated sigh. He told me my father had called him in a state of absolute agitation 12 days ago. My father had bypassed all normal legal inquiries and demanded to know the exact mechanisms required to completely block non-family members from exercising any financial authority over the estate in the event of a sudden medical incapacitation. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. I asked Miles why my father was suddenly terrified of medical incapacitation. Miles told me the terrible truth. A thick legal package had arrived at my parents' house via courier a few weeks prior. It contained a finalized durable power of attorney document granting full comprehensive asset control directly to Grant. The document bore a verified digital stamp of my personal signature authorizing the transfer of power. My father had taken one look at the paperwork and immediately suspected it was a sophisticated forgery. He knew me better than anyone. He knew I would never sign over my birthright without sitting down and discussing it with him first. He completely refused to accept the document. That single forged paper triggered a quiet internal audit of his own accounts, which ultimately resulted in him discovering financial irregularities and firing Renee Cole. I ended the call with Miles and stared blankly at the dark screen of my laptop. Every single document I had uncovered was a shovel digging a deeper grave for my family. This was never a crime of passion. It was a hostile corporate takeover disguised as a medical tragedy. Grant and his accomplices had found an absolute goldmine. When my father uncovered the true value of the land refused to sell and caught on to the forged legal trap, they realized they had to drastically accelerate their timeline. They could not kill my parents outright. A double homicide would freeze the entire estate in a messy police investigation and tie up the assets in probate court for years. The federal logistics project would move on without them. They needed my parents alive but completely incapacitated. They needed me shattered by grief, crying in a hospital waiting room and leaning entirely on my capable, highly organized husband. The poisoning was not a chaotic act of violence. It was simply a bureaucratic operational step in a flawless financial acquisition. And I was the blind, naive variable they thought they had perfectly controlled. The knock on my apartment door came at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. It was not a polite tap. It was the heavy authoritative strike of law enforcement. I opened the door to find Detective Lena Voss standing in the hallway. She did not offer a standard greeting. She stepped inside my home uninvited, and the temperature in my living room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She told me the precinct had received an anonymous phone call late last night. The caller claimed I was drowning in secret financial obligations. They alleged I had engaged in a vicious screaming match with my parents over liquidating family real estate assets just 3 weeks ago. I stared at the detective in absolute disbelief. I have 0 debt. My credit score is immaculate, and I have never once raised my voice at my mother or father about their finances. But the anonymous tipster had planted a seed of doubt so perfectly shaped, it almost looked like the truth. Lena did not read me my rights. She did not pull out silver handcuffs. Instead, she did something much worse. She asked me if I had recently used my corporate access to run inheritance tax projections on my personal devices. She watched my eyes dart around the room. She was observing my panic. I told her she was completely out of her mind. But as soon as she left my apartment, I rushed to the dining table and opened my work laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I logged into my secure company cloud drive. I scrolled past my active client portfolios and froze. Sitting in a subfolder I had not opened in 6 months was a newly modified spreadsheet. The file name was simply Estate Valuation. I opened it and felt the blood drain entirely from my face. Someone had meticulously calculated the exact liquidation value of the Riverside warehouse property. They had factored in federal inheritance tax rates, state capital gains percentages, and projected legal fees. The final cell highlighted the exact net profit I would theoretically receive if my parents passed away. The metadata showed the file had been heavily edited just 4 days before my parents were poisoned. The invisible trap was closing tightly around my throat. I was not just a grieving daughter anymore. The anonymous tip and the fabricated digital evidence were weaving a perfectly damning narrative. I was being meticulously framed as the greedy, desperate child who poisoned her own parents for a massive payday. I felt the oxygen leaving the room. I was suffocating inside my own life. I heard the brass key turn in the front door lock. Grant walked into the apartment carrying a cardboard tray holding 2 large coffees. He looked perfectly exhausted, playing the role of the devoted husband holding our shattered lives together. He set the coffees on the kitchen counter and walked over to me. He kissed the top of my head. He asked me how I was holding up today. His voice was soft and full of manufactured empathy. I forced my facial muscles to relax into a tired smile. I told him I was just drained from the hospital visits. He handed me a warm cup of coffee and leaned casually against the granite counter. He took a slow sip of his dark roast and smoothly changed the subject. He mentioned he was trying to organize some of our own tax documents to make sure everything was in perfect order while we dealt with the medical chaos. Then he asked the questions. He asked me if I remembered exactly where I saved my verified digital signature file on the shared home server. He casually stated he needed it to authorize a minor extension on our own property taxes. Then he chuckled softly and asked if I remembered the administrative password for the old laser printer sitting in my home office. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. The questions were delivered with such casual elegance they almost sounded innocent. But they were not innocent. They were a terrifying confirmation of my worst fears. I took a slow sip of my coffee to hide the violent trembling in my hands. I gave him a fake password and told him the signature file was on a corrupted thumb drive I lost many months ago. He nodded sympathetically and went into the bedroom to change his clothes. The moment the bedroom door clicked shut, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Miles. Our old family lawyer spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. He had pulled a massive favor with a forensic security specialist he knew from a previous corporate litigation case. They had analyzed the digital metadata embedded in the forged temporary power of attorney document. The exact document my father had suspected was completely fake. Miles told me the document was not created at a downtown law firm. It was generated and printed from the internet routing address registered directly to my own apartment. He gave me the exact timestamp. It was printed at 2:11 in the morning on a Tuesday. I closed my eyes. I knew exactly where I was at 2:11 in the morning on that specific Tuesday. I was asleep in my bed, heavily medicated on strong over-the-counter cold medicine, and Grant was right beside me, or at least I thought he was. I hung up with Miles and walked quietly into my home office. We had a small security camera sitting high up on the bookshelf. It was originally purchased to monitor our golden retriever who had passed away 2 years ago. We never bothered to unplug it. It just sat there silently recording the hallway in a continuous loop of 72 hours before writing over the old video footage. I pulled the tiny memory card from the camera and slid it into my laptop adapter. I isolated the specific date Miles gave me. I scrubbed the video timeline forward to 2 o'clock in the morning. The black and white night vision footage flickered onto my screen. The hallway was completely empty. Then at exactly 2 o'clock, the bedroom door opened. Grant stepped out into the hallway. He was not walking like a man going to the kitchen for a late glass of water. He moved with silent, predatory precision. He wore dark sweatpants and a plain gray shirt. He glanced at the closed door of the guest room, then slipped quietly into my home office. The camera angle was fixed purely on the doorway. I could not see what he was actually doing inside the room, but I did not need to see it. I watched the digital timestamp tick forward at the bottom of the screen. 2:10, 2:11, 2:12. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, Grant emerged from the office. He was holding a thin manila folder tucked tightly against his side. He walked silently back into our bedroom and closed the door behind him. I sat in the cold glow of the laptop screen and felt my entire reality shatter into jagged, unrecognizable pieces. Up until this exact moment, I had harbored a tiny, desperate fraction of denial. I had allowed myself to believe that maybe my husband was just an accessory. Maybe he had simply discovered the plot and decided to quietly profit from it. Maybe he was just covering the tracks for someone else. But watching him operate in the dead of night inside our own home stripped away every single delusion I had left. Grant was not a bystander. He was not an accomplice. He was the architect. He was the man holding the absolute darkest part of this entire nightmare. He had smiled at me over dinner, kissed me goodnight, and then walked down the hall to forge the legal documents that would strip my family of everything they owned. The true horror of my situation finally washed over me in a suffocating wave. My husband had spent years learning my daily habits. He knew my digital passwords. He knew my corporate work schedule. He knew exactly how much cold medicine I took when I felt sick. He had studied me like a vulnerable target. If he had the capability and the sheer cold-blooded ruthlessness to perfectly forge my signature in the middle of the night, he could do absolutely anything. He was currently using my emotional devastation as an impenetrable shield. He was playing the hero in public while tightening the noose around my neck in private. He was not just trying to steal the Riverside warehouse property. He was planning to use my own overwhelming grief as the ultimate legal instrument to execute his flawless theft. And if I made a single wrong move, he would happily let me take the full fall for the attempted murder of my own parents. Exactly 7 days had passed since I walked into the sunroom of my childhood home. 1 full week since the foundation of my reality crumbled. I returned to the house on a Tuesday morning because the local security company notified me that the auxiliary power grid in the detached garage had mysteriously tripped. I walked across the cold, dew-covered lawn and pulled open the heavy side door. The air inside smelled of stale motor oil and damp wood. I found the gray metal breaker box on the back wall and flipped the tripped switch. A low mechanical hum immediately filled the space as the power returned. I looked up toward the wooden rafters. Sitting on a high dusty shelf was a small black digital storage drive. It was connected by a thick black cable to an old security camera mounted on the rear exterior wall. My father had installed it nearly a decade ago to watch the back alley. He told my mother it stopped working years ago. But my father was a man who never abandoned a failing system without building a secret redundancy. He just stopped talking about it. I climbed a wooden step stool and brought the dusty box down. I carried it into the quiet kitchen and connected it to my laptop using an adapter cable I found in the study. The software interface was incredibly primitive. I bypassed the recent empty recordings and jumped backward in time. I scrolled to exactly 3 nights before my parents collapsed on the floor. I clicked play and held my breath. The night vision footage was washed in a harsh green hue, but the resolution was sharp enough to cut through the darkness. 3 figures stood in the narrow blind spot behind the garage. They were perfectly hidden from the front porch camera and the neighborhood streetlights. I stared at the screen and felt the blood freeze completely in my veins. My husband Grant stood with his back straight and his hands shoved deeply into the pockets of his expensive wool coat. Standing across from him was my cousin Owen, shifting his weight nervously from side to side. And next to Owen was the recently fired accountant Renee Cole. The 3 of them looked like a ruthless corporate board of directors conducting a hostile takeover in the dead of night. The camera had a cheap microphone built into the plastic casing. The audio was badly distorted by the wind rustling the bare oak trees, but the distinct cadence of my husband pushed through the static. His voice lacked any trace of the gentle warmth he used with me in our apartment. It was absolutely cold. It was calculating. It was the voice of a man giving an irrevocable command. I turned the volume up until the laptop speakers vibrated. Grant leaned toward Owen and spoke with terrifying clarity. When the temporary guardianship is done, Nora will sign without reading. If not, the grief will be enough to paralyze her. I hit the pause button. I sat in the silent kitchen and let those words sink deep into my bones. He was talking about me as if I was a broken machine. I was not his wife. I was a predictable variable. I was a fragile emotional liability he planned to exploit. I pressed play again. Grant pulled his right hand out of his heavy coat pocket. He held a small square object. The ambient moonlight caught the glossy foil packaging. It was the exact same box of artisanal chamomile tea I had discovered crushed in the kitchen garbage can. He handed it directly to Renee. He pointed a firm finger at her chest and gave her a final instruction that was lost to the wind. Then he turned around and walked back toward his silver sedan. He left them standing in the dark with the poison in their hands. The laptop screen faded to black as the motion sensor deactivated. I did not cry. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal burned away any tears I had left to shed. My phone buzzed loudly on the granite counter. It was Miles. Our old family lawyer sounded completely out of breath. He told me he had just finished pulling the classified municipal planning files for the River District. Miles confirmed everything my father had suspected. The massive federal transport hub was fully approved and the zoning maps were officially locked. The Riverside warehouse property was the keystone of the entire commercial project. Miles stated the real market value of the land was not a few $1,000,000. It was easily worth tens of millions of dollars once the government concrete was poured. Then Miles delivered the final crushing blow. He told me he had finally cracked the password on the encrypted estate files my father had sent him 2 weeks ago. My parents never had any intention of selling the property to corporate developers. They did not care about the sudden financial windfall. My father had spent the last month quietly drafting the legal framework for an irrevocable community trust. He and my mother were preparing to transfer the entire deed and all future profits into a fund dedicated to the former warehouse employees and a local vocational training program. They were going to give the entire massive fortune away. I thanked Miles and ended the call. The silence in the house was deafening. The final piece of the puzzle slid perfectly into place, and the picture it formed was utterly grotesque. Grant did not just want the money. He was consumed by an absolute venomous rage. He had discovered the true value of the land and realized the massive fortune he thought he was destined to control was about to be handed away to strangers. He watched my parents prepare to sign away tens of millions of dollars, and he decided their lives were simply worth less than the dirt they owned. I slid off the kitchen stool and sat on the cold hardwood floor. I pulled my knees tightly to my chest. The truth finally broke me. The poisoning, the forged legal documents, the fake sympathy, it was all horrific. But the deepest fatal wound was looking back at the last 4 years of my life. I remembered the night I met Grant at a crowded corporate mixer downtown. He bumped into me near the bar. He was charming and entirely focused on my every word. He asked all the right questions. He courted me with a flawless, elegant persistence. He seamlessly integrated himself into my family dinners. He played golf with my father. He bought my mother her favorite exotic flowers. Now I realized it was never a romance. It was a long-term investment strategy. He targeted me. He researched my family portfolio before he ever bought me a drink. He married me because I was the only naive heir to a forgotten fortune he patiently waited to exploit. I was nothing but the biological key to the vault. He held me in his arms while I sobbed uncontrollably in the hospital hallway. He stroked my hair and kissed my forehead while he waited for the heavy sedatives to finish the job. Every soft touch was a tactical lie. Every word of comfort was a calculated maneuver to keep me docile while he stole my inheritance and framed me for murder. I sat on the floor of my childhood home and let the grieving daughter die completely. The woman who stood back up was someone entirely different. I did not scream. I did not throw the laptop against the wall. The absolute magnitude of the betrayal burned away any lingering traces of the naive woman I used to be. It crystallized something incredibly dark and deeply methodical inside my chest. I am a professional risk analyst. When a vital system is fundamentally compromised, you do not panic and confront the hostile entity. You quietly isolate the threat. You map the full extent of the vulnerabilities. And then you dismantle the adversary piece by piece. I copied the garage security footage onto 3 separate encrypted flash drives. I put the original hard drive back into the dusty cardboard box and left the house looking exactly as it had for the last 7 days. I drove straight to the downtown police precinct. Detective Lena Voss and our family lawyer Miles Wexler sat across from me in a cramped, windowless interrogation room. I slid one of the encrypted drives across the scratched metal table. I watched their faces closely as the black and white footage played on the precinct monitor. I watched the detective completely stiffen when Grant handed the foil box of poison to the accountant. When the screen finally went dark, Lena looked at me with a sharp, predatory focus. She asked if I wanted my husband arrested right now. I shook my head firmly. An immediate arrest would only catch Grant on an isolated conspiracy charge. A smart defense attorney could spin the audio and obscure the context. Owen and Renee might panic and slip completely out of our grasp. I did not just want to stop the bleeding. I wanted the entire criminal network dragged into the blinding light. I told the detective I would remain absolutely silent. I would return to my apartment and sleep next to the man who tried to murder my family. I wanted the trap to snap shut only when they had absolutely no room to breathe and no legal avenues left to escape. Miles opened his battered leather briefcase. He had been quietly working his own channels while I was hunting for the camera backups. He pulled out a freshly stamped court docket and slid it toward me. Grant had not just been making me coffee and comforting me in our apartment. 2 days ago, he had quietly filed an emergency judicial petition for temporary medical and financial guardianship. I read the sworn affidavit attached to the petition. My husband had painted a masterful, devastating portrait of a hysterical, deeply broken woman. He described me in official court records as emotionally paralyzed, mentally unstable, and completely unfit to manage my parents' complex financial estate during a severe medical crisis. He cited my lack of sleep and my sudden bouts of crying as proof of my incompetence. If the county judge signed that specific document, Grant would have unilateral, unchallengeable control over every single asset my family owned. Lena began mapping the operational hierarchy on the whiteboard. The roles were perfectly distributed. Renee was the chemist and the delivery system. She carefully prepared the daily doses, ensuring the bitter sedatives were entirely masked by the strong artisanal chamomile blend. Owen was the logistics runner. He used his desperate gambling connections to manipulate the county clerk registry, steal the original green folder containing the property deeds, and prepare the fraudulent chain of title transfers. But Grant was the undeniable architect. Miles slid another document across the table to prove it. It was a clandestine consulting agreement drafted between Grant and the aggressive real estate investment group backing the developers. The contract included a staggering performance clause. If Grant secured total irrevocable control of the Riverside property within 30 days, he would receive a massive personal acquisition bonus. The paperwork spelled it out clearly. He would walk away with $7 million. That was the exact price tag he placed on my parents' lives. Later that afternoon, I walked into the secure recovery wing of the hospital. My parents had been transferred out of the intensive care unit. They were still physically weak, but the heavy, suffocating fog of the sedatives was finally lifting from their minds. I sat in a plastic chair between their beds and asked a single pointed question. I asked exactly how the chamomile tea ended up in their kitchen. My mother squeezed her eyes shut. Her voice was raspy but entirely coherent. She told me Grant had stopped by unannounced over a week ago. He claimed the tea was an exclusive thank you gift from a wealthy corporate client. He was incredibly persistent. He sat at their kitchen island and insisted the herbal blend would help lower my father's elevated blood pressure. They both hated the bitter taste, but they drank it every single afternoon simply because they trusted my husband completely. He had weaponized their love for him. I returned to our shared apartment that evening. I parked my car in the underground garage and took a long, deep breath. The cold, calculating risk analyst faded completely into the background. I unlocked the front door wearing the skin of a thoroughly shattered woman. Grant was sitting on the living room sofa reviewing complex spreadsheets on his laptop. I dropped my heavy leather bag onto the floor. I let my shoulders slump forward. I walked across the room and collapsed onto the cushions right beside him. I buried my face in my hands and let out a long, trembling sigh. I forced exhausted tears to pool in the corners of my eyes. Grant immediately closed his laptop and tossed it onto the coffee table. He wrapped his arms tightly around my shaking shoulders, pulling my head against his chest. I rested my cheek against his expensive shirt and listened to his steady, deceptive heartbeat. I whispered that I could not take the immense pressure anymore. I told him the mounting hospital bills, the endless police questions, and the looming property taxes were completely crushing my spirit. I looked up at him with wide, desperate eyes. I begged him to just make the Riverside property burden go away. I told him I wanted to sell the dirt immediately so we could just focus entirely on my parents' physical recovery. I stroked his arm and told him I trusted him completely to handle all the complicated paperwork because my brain was entirely too foggy to read anything properly. I played the exact role he had scripted for me in his court affidavit. I became the helpless, paralyzed wife clinging to her capable savior. I felt the subtle physical shift in his posture, the sudden predatory thrill vibrating just beneath his skin. He kissed my forehead with profound manufactured tenderness. He promised me he would carry the entire heavy burden so I could finally rest. He smoothly mentioned that he already had some preliminary corporate buyers lined up who could expedite a lucrative cash sale. He said he just needed me to sign a few standardized authorization forms to bypass the mandatory waiting periods. He kept his voice soothing and incredibly low. He suggested we get the unpleasant business out of the way quietly tomorrow afternoon. He told me he had already booked a private conference room in the hospital recovery wing right down the hall from my parents' room. He framed it as a gentle courtesy. He wanted to finalize the legal paperwork there so I would not have to leave their side for more than 20 minutes. He thought he was being remarkably efficient. He thought he had successfully manipulated a grieving, terrified daughter into handing over the keys to a massive fortune. He looked at me with deep, fake affection and told me absolutely everything was going to be perfectly fine. I nodded weakly and leaned back into his warm embrace. He truly believed the moment of his absolute victory was less than 24 hours away. He had absolutely no idea he was scheduling his own execution and walking directly into a flawless legal slaughterhouse. The private conference room on the 4th floor of the hospital recovery wing smelled strongly of industrial bleach and stale coffee. The tiny microphone taped flat against my sternum felt like a block of solid ice pressing relentlessly into my skin. I sat at the edge of the polished mahogany table and forced my shoulders to slump forward. I was no longer a senior risk analyst hunting for anomalies. I was playing the exact role my husband had written for me. I was the utterly broken wife. Grant walked through the heavy wooden door precisely at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He looked immaculate in a charcoal gray tailored suit, radiating an aura of total competence and deep sorrow. He opened his Italian leather briefcase and carefully arranged a thick stack of legal documents across the table. I stared down at the crisp white pages, the emergency guardianship petition, the absolute consent to liquidate real property, the durable medical and financial power of attorney. This was the legal guillotine he had spent months designing. I let my hands tremble visibly as I picked up the documents. I told him my vision was entirely blurry from crying and my head was pounding too hard to comprehend the dense legal paragraphs. I begged him to assure me this was the only way to protect my parents' estate from government interference. Grant pulled his chair closer to mine. He placed his warm hand over my shaking fingers and pushed a heavy silver pen into my palm. His voice was smooth, but layered with a sharp underlying impatience he could no longer hide. He leaned in close to my ear and whispered that I needed to be brave. He told me this was a tragic biological accident, but we had to act immediately before the state locked the accounts. Then his mounting frustration momentarily pierced his flawless facade. He sighed heavily and muttered a sentence that sealed his fate. He said, "It is a tragedy, Nora, but they were never supposed to go down that fast." I gripped the silver pen so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. He had just admitted he knew the expected timeline of the chemical collapse. He knew the poison was designed to be a slow, gradual decline rather than a sudden, violent drop. He possessed intimate knowledge of the biological mechanism that almost stopped my parents' hearts. While I sat in the hospital gathering his subtle slip of the tongue, Detective Lena Voss already possessed the explosive masterstroke. Early that same morning, Lena and her tactical team had cornered my cousin Owen in the alleyway behind his apartment building. They did not ask him polite questions. They presented him with a mountain of financial evidence detailing his massive illegal offshore betting debts and threatened him with federal wire fraud and accessory to attempted murder. Owen was a miserable coward who survived on borrowed time. He folded in less than 5 minutes. To save his own skin, he agreed to wear a covert recording device and meet Grant at a noisy downtown diner for a scheduled operational update. Miles had played the audio file for me just an hour before my hospital meeting. In that diner booth, Grant had completely lost his meticulous executive temper. The hidden microphone captured him viciously slamming his fist onto the table. Grant explicitly blamed the accountant Renee for panicking and increasing the sedative dosage entirely too early. He hissed that her utter incompetence almost caused a double homicide investigation instead of a quiet medical tragedy. Then he turned his rage directly on Owen, violently cursing him out for misplacing the original green folder containing the vital zoning maps and the official property valuation notes. Grant had confessed to the entire conspiracy on a crystal-clear digital recording. Back in the hospital conference room, the heavy silver pen was still resting in my sweating palm. Grant tapped his index finger against the signature line, urging me to sign away my family fortune. Suddenly, his cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany table. The caller identification screen lit up. It was a text message from Owen. Lena had instructed my cousin to send a carefully crafted panic text, indicating that county detectives were currently asking aggressive questions about an off-site industrial storage rental. I watched the color drain completely from my husband's handsome face. The absolute confidence vanished, replaced instantly by raw, primal panic. He snatched his cell phone from the table and shoved it deep into his pocket. He looked at the unsigned documents, then looked at his expensive wristwatch. He abruptly stood up and told me a massive crisis had just erupted at his corporate office. He said we would have to finish the paperwork tomorrow morning right before the scheduled court hearing. He practically sprinted out of the hospital wing, leaving the unsigned legal guillotine sitting right on the table. Grant drove his silver sedan recklessly across the city limits, heading straight toward a dilapidated self-storage facility situated on the far eastern edge of the county line. He had absolutely no idea that 3 unmarked police vehicles were tailing him flawlessly through the heavy afternoon traffic. Lena and her team parked a block away and watched through long-range optical lenses as Grant punched a security code into the electronic keypad of unit number 412. Grant rolled up the heavy corrugated metal door. He stepped inside the dark bay and frantically began rearranging several heavy cardboard boxes. He pulled a single thin notebook from the bottom of a stack, shoved it frantically into his jacket, and locked the metal door back into place. He sprinted back to his car and sped away, believing he had successfully secured the most damaging ledger and that the rest of his hidden cash was perfectly safe until the guardianship hearing concluded. The moment his taillights disappeared down the highway, Lena and her tactical squad moved in. They did not wait for him to return. They presented the facility manager with a signed emergency search warrant and cut the heavy steel padlock right off the metal door. What they uncovered inside that dusty concrete unit was the absolute physical anatomy of a flawless corporate crime. Sitting on a folding card table was a heavy brass counterfeit notary seal, completely identical to the one used by my father's legitimate law firm. Stacked neatly in plastic storage bins were dozens of blank property transfer deeds waiting to be filed. They found a high-capacity digital hard drive containing immaculate high-resolution scans of my personal signature ready to be forged onto any document necessary. Resting in the corner was the missing green folder stolen directly from my father's home office, still containing the original federal zoning blueprints and the astronomical financial projections. And finally, at the very bottom of a plastic crate, they discovered a secondary financial spreadsheet detailing the exact cash installments transferred to Renee and Owen for their treacherous roles. My cell phone rang. I stood alone in the quiet hospital corridor outside my parents' room. Detective Voss was on the other end of the line. Her voice was vibrating with pure adrenaline. She told me they had secured the absolute mother lode. They had the forged tools, the stolen documents, the poisoned timeline, and the audio confessions. She asked for my immediate permission to dispatch a heavily armed strike team to our apartment and arrest Grant in his living room before the sun went down. I looked through the glass window of the hospital room. I watched my mother slowly turning her head on the pillow and my father weakly gripping the edge of his blanket. They were broken, fragile, and fighting for every single breath because the man I married decided their lives were an acceptable operational cost. I pressed the phone tightly against my ear and spoke with a voice entirely devoid of warmth or mercy. I told the detective to stand down. I explicitly ordered her not to arrest him tonight. Grant had weaponized the legal system to steal my family legacy. He had planned to use the formal courtroom as the ultimate stage for his absolute victory. I wanted him to walk into that emergency guardianship hearing tomorrow morning, wearing his best tailored suit, thinking I was completely defeated. I wanted the absolute truth to be ripped open in the exact room where he thought he was untouchable. I wanted him destroyed not in the shadows of our apartment, but under the blinding lights of the law. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung open exactly at 9 o'clock in the morning. The emergency probate hearing was scheduled in a small windowless chamber on the 3rd floor. I sat at the petitioner's table with my hands folded neatly in my lap. I wore a sharp black suit and absolutely zero makeup. I looked pale and exhausted. When Grant walked into the room, he saw exactly what he expected to see. He saw a shattered, grieving wife who was completely ready to surrender. He wore a bespoke navy blue suit and a perfectly knotted silk tie. He walked with the effortless posture of a man who had already won the war. He placed his Italian leather briefcase on the polished mahogany table and gave me a soft, sympathetic smile. He gently touched my shoulder and whispered that everything would be over very soon. He was absolutely right. It was about to be over, but not in the way he had meticulously planned. The presiding judge entered the room and called the emergency guardianship hearing to order. Grant stood up immediately. He began his rehearsed speech with flawless emotional cadence. He told the judge about the sudden tragic medical crisis that had befallen his beloved in-laws. He pointed a sorrowful finger at me and claimed I was too emotionally paralyzed to manage the complex financial burdens of the massive estate. He formally requested immediate and unilateral executive control over all family assets to prevent a catastrophic financial collapse. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the forged documents Grant had submitted to the clerk the day before. He asked if there were any objections from the family. I did not cry. I did not shake. I stood up slowly from my wooden chair. I looked Grant dead in the eyes, and I watched the fake sympathy drain completely out of his face as my voice rang out sharp and steady across the silent courtroom. I told the judge I absolutely objected to every single word my husband had just spoken. Before Grant could recover from his shock, the heavy double doors at the back of the chamber swung open again. Our old family lawyer, Miles Wexler, walked in carrying 2 massive cardboard boxes completely filled with physical evidence. Right behind him was Detective Lena Voss, wearing her formal dress uniform. But it was the sight of the final 2 people entering the room that made Grant physically stumble backward against his table. 2 uniformed medical transport officers pushed 2 hospital wheelchairs down the center aisle. My mother and father sat in those chairs. They were incredibly pale and their breathing was visibly shallow. They had portable oxygen tanks strapped to the back of their seats. But their eyes were wide open and they were absolutely lucid. The flawless corporate mask Grant wore for 4 years shattered into a million pieces. His jaw dropped. His hands began to tremble violently. He looked at the heavy wooden doors as if calculating the exact distance he needed to run. Lena stepped subtly into the center aisle, completely blocking his only exit. Miles did not waste a single second. He approached the judge's bench and began surgically dismantling my husband's entire life. He laid out the timeline of the hostile corporate takeover. He presented the forged temporary power of attorney. He placed the heavy brass counterfeit notary seal we had recovered from the storage unit right next to the judge's gavel. He submitted the financial records for the ghost company Crescent Harbor Holdings, proving that Grant was the sole operational architect, and then Miles dropped the absolute heaviest weight onto the scales of justice. He presented the clandestine consulting contract guaranteeing Grant a $7 million cash bonus if he successfully secured the Riverside warehouse property within 30 days. Grant tried to speak. He stammered frantically, claiming the documents were entirely fabricated, but his desperate lies were instantly cut short. Miles submitted a sworn videotape deposition from my cousin Owen. The screen in the courtroom flickered to life. Owen sat in a police interrogation room crying like a broken child. He confessed to everything. He admitted Grant promised to wipe out his massive gambling debts and buy him a luxury penthouse condo in the new development simply for stealing the original green folder and keeping his mouth shut. Then Lena stepped forward and handed the judge a signed confession from the accountant, Renee Cole. Confronted with the undeniable bank transfer records and the security camera footage Renee had cracked under federal pressure, her statement explicitly confirmed that Grant had supplied the toxic artisanal chamomile tea. He had personally calculated the exact pharmaceutical dosage required to mimic a severe natural stroke without causing an immediate suspicious death. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. The judge stared at Grant with absolute raw disgust. Grant was completely backed into a corner. He was sweating profusely. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table until his knuckles turned bone white. He looked desperately at me, pleading with his eyes, begging me to stop the execution. I felt absolutely nothing for him. He was a stranger wearing a suit. The final devastating blow did not come from the police or the lawyers. It came directly from the woman he tried to murder. My mother raised her frail, trembling hand. The judge immediately granted her permission to speak. Her voice was incredibly weak, barely more than a raspy whisper, but the absolute fury behind her words commanded the entire room. She told the judge she had something else to submit. She reached into her knitted cardigan and pulled out her cell phone. She pressed play on an audio file she had secretly recorded weeks before the tea was ever poured. The audio echoed through the quiet chamber. It was a heated argument in my parents' sunroom. My father's voice was stern and unyielding, telling Grant that the Riverside property would never be sold to his corporate friends. And then Grant's voice sliced through the recording. He sounded venomous and completely unhinged. He threatened to drag my parents through a humiliating competency hearing if they refused to sign the transfer deeds. He practically screamed that the land belonged to him by right of marriage, and he would not let two stubborn old fools stand in the way of progress. The audio ended with a sharp click. The judge did not even bother to formally close the hearing. He slammed his wooden gavel down with the force of a thunderclap. He explicitly denied the emergency guardianship petition on the grounds of massive systemic fraud and immediately referred the entire horrifying matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Lena did not wait for Grant to catch his breath. She marched straight across the courtroom, grabbed him by the shoulder, and violently spun him around. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs, echoing off the high ceiling, was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Grant panicked completely. The sophisticated corporate executive vanished. He thrashed against the detective. He screamed my name over and over again. He begged me to listen to him. He shouted that he only did it for us to secure our future so we would never have to worry about money again. I stood perfectly still and watched the police officers drag him kicking and screaming out of the heavy double doors. I watched his immaculate tailored suit drag against the dirty floor. He was utterly pathetic. 1 month later, my parents were finally cleared to return home. Their physical recovery would be slow and require months of daily therapy, but their minds were entirely unbroken. The very first thing my father did when he sat back down at his mahogany desk was sign the finalized irrevocable trust documents. We did exactly what Grant tried to stop. My family officially transferred 100% of the Riverside warehouse property directly into a community trust fund. We established a massive vocational training scholarship for local blue-collar workers and fully funded the pensions of the men who used to work the docks. We cut off every single ounce of value that the corporate developers and my greedy husband had tried to steal. The fortune was gone, given back to the people who actually built the city. Grant would spend the next 30 years rotting in a maximum security state penitentiary, knowing that his $7 million prize was currently paying for textbooks and trade school tuitions. I moved out of the luxury apartment I once shared with a monster. I filed for an immediate expedited divorce and legally reclaimed my maiden name. I returned to my job at the risk analysis firm, but I viewed the entire world through a permanently altered lens. The nightmare was finally over, but the bitter, painful resonance remained etched deep into my soul. Looking back at the absolute wreckage of my marriage, the thing that truly broke me was not just the horrific realization that my parents were intentionally poisoned for real estate. It was the terrifying, intimately cold truth I discovered along the way. The absolute darkest evil does not always break down your front door wearing a mask. Sometimes evil sleeps in your bed. It memorizes your daily habits. It buys your mother her favorite flowers. The thing that finally shattered my heart was knowing that the very same man who held me in the hospital hallway, who stroked my hair while I sobbed, had already perfectly calculated exactly how to turn my blinding tears into a legal signature and how to weaponize that signature into a death sentence for my entire family. Thank you so much for listening to this story today, and please leave a comment down below, letting me know where in the world you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts together. Please remember to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us even more by hitting the hype button so that the story in this video can be heard by many more people.